there was an incredibly sophisticated and deeply embedded artistic community that has always been a feature of this part of East London. At the time that the V&A was actually coming into being in the middle of the 19th century, that one of the first journalists who visits the Great Exhibition, he spends some time coming to East London to trace the lives of the makers who have contributed a huge amount to the Great Exhibition. We at the V&A were in part drawn here to honour some of that history, but also to make sure that that sense of being open, building a community that feels accessible and dynamic in the way in which it engages.
Thank you very much to Mike, and thank you also to Gavin. Excuse me, as you heard, I'm Georgina Godwin. I host Visionary, which is Here East podcast, and I'll be your moderator today. Now, before we get started, I just wanted you to take a second and look around you. As Gavin said, this exact space was originally built for the 2012 Olympics. He told us it was the Global Press and Broadcast Centre. It was designed to capture and amplify the stories of human potential on the world's biggest stage. But when the Games ended, this space didn't become a relic as it so easily could have done. It became a blank canvas. And over the last 14 years, it's transformed into an exemplar for how creative communities can really thrive. That is the unique DNA of Here East. It was engineered specifically to break down walls, allowing modern tech hubs, digital artists, academics, and creators to coexist, collaborate, and scale their ideas under one massive roof. It's a physical manifestation of a new creative reality. And when you look more broadly at the city around us, at London, it raises the perfect question for today's discussion. Do spaces shape culture, or does culture shape spaces? So this isn't an abstract debate, it's an economic reality. The latest 2026 figures from London and Partners and City Hall show that London's creative industries contribute a staggering £64 billion to the economy every single year. In fact, the Greater London Authority report released just this month reveals that strategic investment has unlocked £11.9 billion in creative sector spending over the last decade. That's delivering over 145,000 square metres of newly evolved, flexible cultural spaces across the capital. So we don't create in a vacuum. Where we are physically changes what we make, who we meet, and what feels possible. Well, today we're going to unpack that relationship. And to explore that, I'm thrilled to be joined by three industry leaders who are actively rewriting the rules of architecture, of culture, and of creative infrastructure. They are Gus Casely-Hayford, who's director of V&A East, who's fresh off a major milestone with the opening of the new V&A East Museum here in Olympic Park last month. Huge coverage on it, fantastic success, well done. Tamsin Ace, who's director at East Bank, who's shaping one of Europe's most ambitious cultural and educational districts. It's home to the BBC Music Studios, Sadler's Wells East, and many, many more. And finally, Richard Broom from Jason Bruges Studio, who works to develop ambitious interactive installations, turning data and code into immersive experiences presented in major public spaces across London and internationally. I don't know, you've probably seen some of his work, and I'm hoping that Richard will show us a little example a little bit later on. Anyway, thank you all for being here. And if I could start with Tamsin, why does place still matter?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting time to be talking about this with the 75th anniversary of the Festival of Britain at South Bank Centre, with Exhibition Row celebrating 175 years next year from the Great Exhibition. And we have, East Bank and the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park hot off on the back of the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And so the UK has always known how to create place and how and why embedding and hardwiring culture into that from the very beginning matters. And that the idea that place doesn't matter is sort of an abstract idea to me, because yes, we've gone through a period of being kind of having to think about the digital world, but we know more than ever that connectivity and that human connection is really critical and crucial. And the way that East Bank has been created and developed is with these huge anchor institutions who have chosen to be part of the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park and be part of those sort of legacy ambitions, and to really deliver on the promises that were made to East Londoners back in 2005 as to what the Olympic and Paralympic Games would mean and bring for them. And if you look at how East Bank has been formed and created and developed, it hasn't been about individual institutions in isolation just being good neighbours and creating their own programmes. It's about, what does it mean when we build and connect our programmes together? What does it mean when we create spaces that feel welcoming and open and that truly kind of do make communities feel that they belong? And also, what does it mean when you do that without sort of satellite or parachuting into a space? So these bank partners have been working in East London for over 10 years. So think about the spaces that are relevant and are authentic and are needed. And that's what you've got with places like the V&A East storehouse, completely open access and interactive. And already, I know Gus will talk about sort of how successful that space has been. But you have Sadler's Wells East, who have thought about their building from that kind of inside out perspective, and who have learned and looked at whose shoulders we're standing on and thought about creating spaces that really can create that sense of welcome. So they have their community dance floor, which is right in the front corner of their building in a really visible space. And it's a dance floor that's a community space. So whilst they will programme and curate workshops and activities and moments of congregation, they also have a space where you can just come in and plug in and turn up. Now, you can't do that on its own. You have to think about how people know that they belong and that they feel welcomed. But when you're creating cultural quarters on the back of these significant moments of national celebration, where we're imagining a better future, a better world, we want to have hope, that's where these spaces really come alive. And we know on the back of lots of evidence that people are craving connectivity more than ever. The BBC Proms last year had record ticket sales. We know that actually those interactive, intimate experiences are also really important, and that people want to bump into ideas and creativity. And that's what East Bank represents and is all about. And I think when you talk about the wider ecosystem of a place like the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, and how you can come here and bump into and engage with a whole number of different experiences, and how you tell that wider story, you can come to a place like this and you have got the green and blue, you have the nature spaces, you also have shopping, you have culture, you have sport, you have innovation, you have people studying here. When you create spaces where all of those different audiences can bump into each other and intersect, that's what creates a sense of welcome and community and celebration, I think. And that's what we're here to deliver on.
Yeah. And what do you think, Gus? What makes a space creative?
I completely agree with everything that Tamsin said, but I also think that what we've tried to really do is to respect the communities who were here already as well. That there was an incredibly sophisticated and deeply embedded artistic community that has always been a feature of this part of East London. At the time that the V&A was actually coming into being in the middle of the 19th century, that one of the first journalists who visits the Great Exhibition, he spends some time coming to East London to trace the lives of the makers who have contributed a huge amount to the Great Exhibition. And he describes this area as a place of tanners, of carpenters, of painters, of seamstresses, as this was a place that was created by makers. And most of those people creating these amazing kinds of disciplines and innovations within disciplines weren't getting the necessary support that that they would have liked. They were creating disciplines, but doing it kind of very much kind of uphill. And I think in coming here, we at the V&A were in part drawn here to honour some of that history, but also to make sure that some of the sorts of communities that would feel that they have benefited from the legacies of the work that those communities have done, some of the people who would actually who feel some sort of genealogical connection to those sorts of communities, how could we foster connections with them? How could we build a platform for their ambition, create spaces within which they can see their histories reflected, but also, I hope, their futures? And so we, from the point of conception, have got out into the schools, into the communities, into the churches and the mosques and the synagogues, and actually asked people what they would want to see and how they would want us to engage with them, to build communities of interest that expand beyond the footprint of our institution. And so we've done this work over the last 5 years, spoken to more than 30,000 young people. I personally visiting more than 100 schools in the 4 boroughs that surround this particular site, and talking about what was coming, but also listening and trying to kind of build an institution that reflects their needs, their aspirations, and their hopes.
Mm.
And I think that is kind of that sense of being open, building a community that feels accessible and dynamic in the way in which it engages.
And it certainly does feel extremely dynamic. Richard, what happens when people from completely different disciplines share the same space?
I think that's the kind of fascinating part about this area around here and the whole of East London, and specifically even I can talk about where our studio is based, having a melting pot of different industries, technologies, cultures, all under one campus, and being able to kind of grow and learn around that is fascinating for us, especially as a studio. We're kind of looking at developing ideas within all sorts of different fields of science and technology all the time, and they influence our artworks. The data that we take from those different industries feeds the reasons why we're kind of creating these artworks for public spaces, whether that's public data or it's kind of interaction with the public. And it's finding that kind of juxtaposition between kind of technology and physical interaction with artworks as well. I think you're talking about people seeking that actual real experience, and I think that's really relevant today, and people actively wanting to obviously have that virtual experience, but obviously that physical experience at the same time is becoming more and more relevant. But yeah, I think that's what I think.
I just wanted to pick up on something you said, Tamsin, about cultural ecosystems. Do you think that that's the way we're moving? It's no longer standalone institutions. We all have to be connected in order for this to work.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the joys of my job is joining the East Bank partners with this openness and generosity of spirit of going, how do we actually support each other, share resource, build on each other's ideas? And that kind of mantra that runs through us is that sort of greater than the sum of its parts. And one of the things that really inspires me about the Olympic Park and East Bank is how our audiences and our students navigate and go from building to building and space to space to sort of connect with different ideas, but from multiple perspectives. And that's the strength of East Bank and how we've been developed as a cultural quarter, is that we're kind of led by a set of joint strategic goals, which underpins everything we do. And my role is to kind of go, well, you're doing that and you're doing that. What would happen if you did that? And that doesn't feel like it's a battle or a challenge for me. The partners are completely up for it. And a really fantastic example of this is V&A East coming to these Bank partners and saying, look, our launch exhibition is looking at the history of Black British music. Do you want to get in on that? And the partners all leapt at that because, believe it or not, that level of collaboration doesn't happen that often. It's really hard to achieve. And what we've now got is all 5 East Bank partners have responded and pivoted their programs to respond to the themes of the exhibition. So from a visitor or a student perspective, you can come and spend a day, a week, a night, a year exploring this big idea. And then layering on top of that, we have the Music is Black Festival, which is 4 live weekends, which then brings in the rich expertise and the creative communities of East London and beyond. And what we're doing is building this ecosystem where we couldn't exist without the other. And I think that is the future. I think that is the strength of what we're doing here in East London, on the Olympic Park and beyond, and the way that we're engaging with the 4 growth boroughs, which is Hackney, Newham, Tower Hamlets and Waltham Forest, looking at their priorities and how we can connect the dots there and tell that connected story. So cultural ecosystems is particularly in sort of challenging funding systems as well, like looking at how we can kind of come together to make bigger impacts. And we do that through joint education programs, through joint training and employment programs. I mean, it's all happening here, and Here East is a really key sort of part of that puzzle.
No, absolutely. And I think the people who are based within Here East would absolutely agree with you and say how freeing it is, how creatively enriching it is to be able to bump into somebody perhaps you've never met before or start working with other partners. I was talking to Tim Berners-Lee recently, and he said that when he was at CERN, he said the most important part of that was the coffee area. He said, of course, there were all these exciting things going on in labs and work on computers and things, but it was the people meeting up, having coffee that made the difference, which I think is extraordinary.
Well, I think we've got a 560-acre coffee area.
Exactly, which is fantastic. Gus, how will you know when the V&A East has succeeded? You've set out what you want to do here, and what's the marker of success for that?
I think for me, I mean, I think about museums particularly through the lens of my memories of visiting museums in my kind of late teens, early 20s, and being drawn by incredible sorts of promotional material for exhibitions, but then arriving and then feeling intimidated by spaces, by the interfaces, by the front facades of the institutions, sometimes by the staff themselves. And how do you kind of create spaces that both feel welcoming, but also in their programs reflect the wider populations? And we've spent a huge amount of time invested in trying to have conversations with East Londoners more widely as well, kind of conversations across kind of particularly younger generations, our target being to try and draw younger, more diverse audiences into our spaces. That you visit most museums and, we are so kind of grateful for the audiences that attend, but the audience profile of most national museums is not like the sorts of people that you see on any kind of London transport kind of train. So I just think dealing with that is something that we struggled with across the course of my career. And I think the thing that has made me most proud, we have incredible buildings, we have amazing collections and program, but the thing that makes me most proud is you look at our staff, you look at our audiences, and they reflect the demographic complexity of the people that we serve. What I found is so frustrating of working in a publicly funded institution that we are all contributing to, and yet the benefits of those spaces so often are enjoyed by tiny numbers of people, and usually the people who can probably most afford to pay for those spaces.
Yeah.
So go visit Storehouse, please, whilst you're here. For those who haven't, walk across the park, and go into kind of, see those spaces on East Bank, not just the V&A, and you will see particularly young people in those spaces, and they just seem so, they've made it their own. And that was our aspiration, not just to get those visitors. You can kind of, take young people at gunpoint to go and visit, space. And you do see kind of in museums, lots of young people being dragooned into those spaces. But we wanted it to create a space that people would just want to be. And what I find deeply frustrating as a parent is that my kind of daughter and her friends, that they enjoy going to kind of to shopping centres to hang out. Why not museums? Why not the sorts of public spaces that East Bank is creating? And we wanted to build the programme, the spaces, the welcome to make that a possibility.
Just to end, Richard, we don't have a great deal of time, but I know you've got some of your work here, which we'd like to see. And I wonder if perhaps while we're watching that, you could tell us what London needs to do to retain the world's leading creators. What should we be investing in now?
Well, I think, as these guys have said very eloquently, we're at the forefront of creativity in London, and we should continue to celebrate that and push that forward. I think that at the forefront of that is young people, as you're saying, and breaking down those barriers of institutions. And I think that is also really important, and also bringing artwork to the forefront, or creative experiences, so that it's really accessible for all. Because as soon as people kind of get access to this, it opens up the world to possibilities, and also means that they feel more accepted, or feel like they can enter into these institutions more freely, because they feel like they've experienced it firsthand, and they've kind of got over that initial barrier. And I think that's really important about public artworks like this, which is a piece that we installed at Wembley Stadium. It was in a disused, very kind of uninviting underpass. We were asked to come along and try and rejuvenate that space, encourage people to use the space, come to the local park, open space there, and also shop. Kids want to shop. But we installed a piece called Shadow Wall. This is part of a series of work that we have. We've got about 5 of these around the world, in different formats. It's very playful. It engages with a wide range of communities and cultures, age groups. Everybody engages it. Funnily enough, if you stand back, you can have somebody that's 5 all the way up to 80, and they're engaging in it exactly the same way. That idea of shadow play, everybody can relate to the human form, and it's completely rejuvenated that space, and it's hopefully really inspired everybody that's gone through there, young, old, rich or poor. And I think that's a really valuable aspect of public artworks, to really get into the hearts of communities and ensure that they understand that, creating is for everybody, and everybody can get something out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it feels like what we're hearing here is that it's not just spaces or culture, but the dynamic relationship between the two that really shapes creative outcomes. Thank you all so much for this. I'm going to hand you back now to Mike McGann. Thank you.
Thank you.